In this video, we will explore the effects of a tariff on a nation that is relatively small compared to the world market. This means that as the nation buys more or less of the good on the world market, the price of the good does not change. Let's assume that the organic kale market in Greenland is competitive and relatively small compared to the rest of the world. The supply curve here is the domestic supply curve for Greenland. The demand curve shown is the domestic demand curve for Greenland. If Greenland does not allow trade with the rest of the world, then the price of kale in Greenland would be at the intersection of domestic supply and domestic demand. The world price of organic kale is $100 a bushel. Since the kale produced on the world market is a perfect substitute for the kale produced in Greenland, Greenland producers must compete with the world price. At a price of $100, domestic producers will produce 4 million bushels of kale, and domestic consumers will consume 24 million bushels. The difference of 20 million bushels is imported from the world market. With free trade with the rest of the world, what is consumer surplus for consumers in Greenland? Also, what is the producer surplus for Greenland's organic kale producers? Consumer surplus is the area below the demand curve and above the market price. It is represented here by the blue triangle. Producer surplus is the area below the market price and above the supply curve and is represented here by the green triangle. The total economic surplus is given by the area A plus B plus C. If Greenland did not allow trade with the rest of the world, the total economic surplus would be just A and C. So B is added by allowing free trade. Now let's look at the effects of the government of Greenland imposing a $100 tariff on each bushel of kale imported into Greenland. Since the world supply of kale to Greenland is perfectly elastic, the tariff will be paid entirely by the consumers in Greenland. So the price paid by consumers in Greenland will be $200. Since $200 is now the price that Greenland producers must compete against, they will now charge $200 per bushel. At a price of $200, domestic producers will supply 8 million bushels, and domestic consumers will buy 20 million bushels. The difference of 12 million bushels will be imported from the world markets. With the $100 tariff imposed, what is the consumer surplus? What is the producer surplus? What is the tariff revenue? Consumer surplus is the area below the demand curve and above the price that consumers pay. It is represented here by the blue triangle. Recall that before the tariff was imposed with free trade, consumer surplus also included the areas given by C plus D plus E and F in the graph. So consumer surplus has been decreased by C plus D plus E and F. Producer surplus is the area below the market price and above the supply curve and is represented here by the green triangle. Notice that area C used to be part of consumer surplus and is now part of producer surplus. So when a tariff is imposed, area C is transferred from consumers to producers. Tariff revenue collected by the government of Greenland will be equal to the tariff times the number of imports. This is shown by the yellow rectangle. The height of the rectangle is the tariff. The base is the number of imports. Height times base, or tariff times imports, gives the area of the rectangle, which is tariff revenue. Area E used to be part of consumer surplus, so consumers are paying the entire tariff, not foreign producers. D and F were part of economic surplus when free trade was allowed, but are no longer part of the economic surplus. Thus, D and F are now deadweight loss. We call D the protective effect. This is the deadweight loss that results from protecting the domestic producers that have a higher opportunity cost than world suppliers. Let's assume the opportunity cost of producing kale is less broccoli being produced. When the domestic kale producers are protected by a tariff, domestic kale production expands from 4 million to 8 million. As the kale production expands, broccoli production must decrease. The fact that the supply curve is above $100 as production expands from 4 to 8 million shows that the opportunity cost is above 100 for these bushels of kale. This means that the value of broccoli given up to produce these additional units of kale is worth more than $100. It is inefficient to give up broccoli that is worth more than $100 a bushel to produce kale that could be purchased for $100 on the world market. Area F is the consumption effect. This deadweight loss results due to the fact that the tariff leads to less kale being consumed. Since the domestic consumer's willingness to pay is more than the opportunity cost of production by world producers from 20 to 24 bushels of kale, it would be efficient to exchange them. But the tariff prevents these efficient exchanges from taking place, creating deadweight loss. Recall the deadweight loss triangles D and F used to be part of consumer surplus. In Greenland, the kale producers are benefited by the tariff, and the government is able to collect additional revenue. However, the consumers are hurt by the tariff. The fact that there is deadweight loss shows that, overall, on net, Greenland is hurt by the tariff. The costs to Greenland outweigh the benefits.